There comes a moment in life when you discover who truly loves you. Not when you're successful, not when you're healthy and capable of handling everything on your own, but when you're lying helpless on the cold ground, unable to get back up. I learned that on an October morning. I fell off the ladder behind my house while cleaning the gutters, the same chore. My wife had spent 20 years warning me. I was too old to keep doing myself. When my back slammed into the wet grass, I heard a soft cracking sound come from my hip, a sound so small that, if I were younger, I probably would have ignored it. But at 68, you immediately know when something inside your body has broken. The pain came seconds later. Sharp, deep, like someone was driving a red-hot iron rod straight through your bones. But the most terrifying part of that morning wasn't the pain. It was the moment I lay there in the freezing grass covered with red maple leaves, staring up at the gray October sky, and realized the first person I thought about was my daughter, Diane, the only child my wife and I had spent nearly our entire lives loving and protecting. She lived exactly 11 minutes away from my house. 11 minutes. Such a short distance that, for years, I believed if anything ever happened to me, Diane would appear immediately. I never imagined I would one day spend so long waiting for a distance of only 11 minutes. But I waited. I waited in the emergency room with 2 cracked ribs and a shattered hip. I waited in a third-floor hospital room filled with the smell of antiseptic and the echo of nurses' footsteps in the hallway after midnight. I waited until every time I heard footsteps approaching my door, my heart instinctively whispered, "She's here." But the door kept opening and closing. Doctors, nurses, janitors, an old man delivering pretzels from the vending machine. Everyone came, except my daughter. My name is Walter. I'm 68 years old, a retired civil engineer. I live alone in a house on Orchard Hill Drive in Decatur, Georgia, the same house my wife and I paid off together years ago, the two of us sitting on the kitchen floor with cheap champagne in paper cups, laughing like we'd won something. I am the kind of man who does everything himself, paints his own porch, fixes his own fence, cleans his own gutters every October, even at 68, even alone, even after everything. That last part is what got me into trouble. But before I tell you about the latter, I need to tell you about Maggie. Her name was Margaret. I called her Maggie for 39 years, through the good years, through the hard ones, through the long, quiet fight at the end that she handled with a grace I could never have matched. She died 3 years ago, and the house on Orchard Hill has been a different kind of place ever since. Still mine, still familiar, but different the way a song sounds different when you've heard the last verse and can't unhear it. Maggie was the clear-eyed one in our marriage. She had this rare ability to say true things without being cruel about it. I spent decades admiring that quality, and occasionally being irritated by it. She used to tell me I was the kind of man who built things and broke things and never once asked for help with either. She said it with affection. She was not wrong. We had one child who lived. Before Diane there was a boy, stillborn, a march I still don't think about directly. We folded that grief up small and put it somewhere quiet the way people did back then, and then Diane arrived, red-faced and furious and perfect, and we poured everything we had left into her. Every last drop of it. I've asked myself 1,000 times in the past year whether that was love or whether it was pressure dressed up as love. I still don't have a clean answer. Diane grew up smart, driven, accustomed to being the center of a small and very attentive universe. I don't want to use the word spoiled because it isn't accurate. She worked hard, earned a partial scholarship to a good school, built a real career before the kids came along. But she was raised by 2 people who made her comfort their first priority. And somewhere in that upbringing, she absorbed a lesson I never intended to teach, that her comfort was simply the natural order of things. She married a man named Craig. Craig sells commercial real estate. He has a very firm handshake and strong opinions about whiskey that I have found exhausting since the first dinner we shared. They live in a newer part of Atlanta with their 2 teenagers. On paper, Diane has an excellent life, but in the last several years I had started noticing the cracks. Craig's business had bad quarters. There was talk of refinancing. Diane began calling more often. At first I took that as a good sign. Then I noticed that most of those calls, if you followed them long enough, eventually landed on the same subject. Money. I helped when I could. That's what fathers do. A few thousand here, a loan there, contributions to the grandkids' college funds. I never kept a formal record because keeping a record felt transactional, like running a ledger on my own daughter, and Maggie's ghost would have found that cold. But Maggie was gone, and I was alone on Orchard Hill Drive. And Diane was 11 minutes away. I thought that was enough. Then October came. I fell off the ladder on a Wednesday morning. I don't remember the impact clearly, just the cold of the grass against my face, and the sound the ladder made when it hit the ground beside me, and one red maple leaf pressed flat against my cheek like it had been placed. There. My first thought was about the stove, whether I had turned it off after breakfast. That is the kind of man I am. My second thought was, call Diane. She was 11 minutes away. I had timed it once, years ago, during the last stretch of Maggie's illness, when Diane and I were trading off care shifts. 11 minutes. I lay there in that cold Georgia morning with my hips sending signals I had never received in 68 years of living, and I genuinely believed that 11 minutes meant everything would be fine. It took 4 days in a hospital bed to understand how wrong I was. The paramedics were young and professional. They told me I had a fractured hip and 2 cracked ribs. They took me to Piedmont, moved me through the ER, and settled me into the 3rd-floor recovery ward by early afternoon. Through all of it, the pain, the x-rays, the paperwork, the questions about next of kin, I kept watching the door. My neighbor Frank arrived before Diane did. Frank is 74 years old, retired high school history teacher, bad knees, a beat-up Camry that he has been threatening to replace for 6 years. He has absolutely no reason to spend a Wednesday afternoon in a hospital, no obligation, no duty, no blood tie to me whatsoever. He heard about the fall from another neighbor, drove himself over, and sat with me for 4 hours straight. He brought a bag of crackers from the vending machine in the lobby because, in his words, he wasn't sure what the protocol was for hospital visits, and crackers seemed like a safe choice. I ate those crackers like they were the finest thing I had ever tasted. Then my phone buzzed. Diane had sent a text. I heard about the fall. So scary. It's been a crazy week, but I'll come see you soon. Love you. Hope you're resting. I read it 4 times. I kept thinking I must be missing something. A follow-up message, and I'm on my way. Something. I wasn't missing anything. That was the whole message. Frank saw me staring at my phone and didn't say a word. He just handed me another cracker. I'll come see you soon. I was lying in a hospital bed with a fractured hip. My daughter lived 11 minutes away, and she was going to try to come see me soon. I want to stop here for a moment, because if you have ever been in a room waiting for someone who did not come, you already know exactly what I am describing. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive as rage. It arrives as a very specific kind of quiet. The quiet of realizing that the picture you have been carrying of your own life does not match the one actually in front of you. And once you have seen that gap clearly, you cannot unsee it. She came on the 4th day. By then I had surgery, a partial hip replacement, explained to me by a surgeon in careful detail that I absorbed maybe 40% of through the medication haze. I was sleeping too much and thinking too clearly in the hours between sleep. The nurses on the 3rd floor knew my name, knew I took my coffee black, and had started leaving the room door slightly open during the day, because I told them a closed hospital door made me feel like I had already been filed away. One nurse in particular, Renata, had a manner that reminded me of Maggie, not sentimental, not hovering. She came in, did what needed doing, asked direct questions, and left. But she always knocked first. She always looked me in the eye. And on the harder days, she would pull her chair close to the bed and just sit for a few minutes without saying much of anything. She didn't need to say much. Just the chair, just the presence. That was enough. Diane arrived on the afternoon of the 4th day. She was dressed like she had come from a lunch meeting somewhere nice. She was carrying a small succulent in a terracotta pot that I later recognized as sold in the hospital gift shop downstairs. She kissed my forehead, looked around the room, then sat in the chair closest to the door, not the chair Renata used. "You look better than I expected," she said. "Better than you expected based on what?" I said. "You haven't seen me." She had the grace to look uncomfortable. She said it had genuinely been a terrible week, the kids' schedules, a deal of Craig's in a delicate phase, logistics that couldn't wait. I listened. I nodded. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, "I have been in this bed for 4 days. You are 11 minutes away." Instead, I asked about the grandchildren. She relaxed immediately, talked about my grandson's track season and my granddaughter's college application essays. Safe things, normal things. I let her go there, but I was watching. Then she set her purse on her lap and cleared her throat in a way I have known since she was 16 years old. It is the specific throat clearing of a woman who wants something and is choosing her words carefully. "Dad," she said, "while you're in recovery, and it sounds like there'll be a rehab facility after this, right? Craig and I have been thinking this might be a good time to talk about the house." I looked at her. "Orchard Hill Drive is a lot of house for one person," she said. "Especially now. The market is really strong right now. And if you sold, you could move into something more manageable. One floor, no stairs, no gutters to worry about. There's actually a really lovely independent living community out in Stone Mountain that we looked at." "You looked at it," I said. She hesitated. "Craig drove by. Just to see. A few weeks ago. I let that sit in the air between us. A few weeks ago, before the fall, before the fractured hip, before I had spent 4 days in this bed without a visit, they had already been planning this, already measuring, already calculating what I had and what it would be worth on the current market." "Diane," I said very quietly, "I fell off a ladder 4 days ago." "I know, Dad. You weren't here. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty," I said. "I'm saying it because you need to hear it said out loud. I was in this bed. You were 11 minutes away. You sent me a text." She stayed another 45 minutes. She looked at her phone twice. When she left, she picked up the succulent by accident, just swept it up with everything else she'd brought in, out of pure habit. And I watched the door swing shut and felt something shift inside my chest that had nothing to do with the cracked ribs. Renata came in about an hour later. She took one look at me and pulled up the chair. "Bad visit," she said. "My daughter wants to sell my house," I said. Renata nodded slowly. She had the particular stillness of someone who has heard many things in hospital rooms and learned not to be shaken by any of them. "She came on day 4, I said. Renata nodded again. "Her mother would have been here in 20 minutes, I said. And then, to my own considerable embarrassment, I started to cry. Not loudly, just the quiet kind, the slow leaking, that happens when you have been holding something very still for too long and your arms finally give out. Renata didn't make a fuss. She handed me a tissue from the bedside table and sat there until it passed, calm and present, the way good people sit with other people when they understand that presence is more useful than any words. "In this job," she said finally, "you learn a lot about people by who shows up." "And who doesn't," I said. "And who doesn't," she agreed. I had a great deal of time to think over the following weeks. That is the thing about a hospital stay, followed by a rehabilitation facility. They hand you time you didn't ask for and cannot escape. I lay in beds in 2 different buildings and I thought carefully about the last several years. The loans, the calls that always eventually bent toward what I could provide. The visits that had grown shorter and further apart. The way Diane's eyes had started moving around the house on Orchard Hill when she came over, not fond, not nostalgic, appraising. I thought about my estate. The house was paid off. The retirement account. A modest investment portfolio. A careful man's careful accumulation over a working life. No fortune, but enough. More than enough for one person living quietly. I had drawn up a will after Maggie died in the fog of that grief and had never returned to it. Diane was the sole beneficiary and the executor. That had made sense in the fog. It made considerably less sense now. I also thought about Craig. Craig, who sold commercial real estate and understood property values with professional precision. Craig, who had driven past an independent living facility in Stone Mountain before I had fallen off any ladder. Craig, who had a firm handshake and whiskey opinions, and a refinanced mortgage, and a wife who had not come to the hospital for 4 days. I made a phone call. My attorney's name is Leonard. He has been my attorney for 21 years, since before Maggie got sick. He is the kind of man who listens more than he talks, which is far rarer than it should be. I explained the situation to him from my rehab room, lying on my back with my leg elevated, speaking quietly so the man in the next bay couldn't hear. Leonard listened all the way through without interrupting. Then he asked a small number of very precise questions. Then he said, "I think we need to discuss some options." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Over the following weeks, while I was doing physical therapy and relearning how to trust my own body and playing chess with Frank over video call on Tuesday evenings, Leonard was putting things in order. The first thing was a new will. I restructured it carefully, thoughtfully. A portion went to the Civil Engineering Scholarship Fund at my alma mater. A portion went to the Piedmont Hospital Foundation, earmarked specifically for patient care on long-term recovery floors, the floors where people like Renata work. A portion went to Frank, because a man who drives himself to a hospital on a Wednesday afternoon with a bag of crackers and no obligation deserves to be acknowledged in writing. And yes, Diane remained in the will. She is my daughter. That did not change. But she was no longer the sole beneficiary, and a professional trustee replaced her as executor. The second thing was the house. I did not sell it, but I transferred it into a living trust structured so that upon my death the property would go to a community land trust building affordable housing in South Atlanta. The equity that Craig had been quietly calculating on that Stone Mountain Drive evaporated entirely. The third thing was the power of attorney. Diane had never asked directly. She hadn't needed to. I could feel the assumption in the room every time my health came up in conversation. I reassigned that authority to Leonard and my physician jointly. People I trusted because they had earned it, not because we shared DNA. None of this was done in anger. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. Anger would have made this a different story, a smaller one. I have seen what anger does to men my age. It hollows them out, turns whatever years they have left into one long grievance letter written to an audience that stopped reading years ago. That is not what I wanted. I did all of this from a place of clarity. What I had seen in that hospital room had clarified something I had been working very hard not to see for years. When you want to know who truly loves you, not who says they love you, not who intends to love you someday, when it's more convenient, get hurt. Let it be real and unglamorous and inconvenient. See who drives. I came home to Orchard Hill Drive in November. Frank came over that first evening with a pot of soup his wife had made, and helped me navigate the front steps, which I now approach with the respect they have always deserved. We sat in my kitchen, and I told him most of what I've just told you. He listened the way good people listen, without rushing toward solutions or reassurances, just letting the words find their places in the room. "What are you going to tell Diane?" he asked. "The truth," I said. "When the time comes." The time came 3 weeks later. Diane called and said she and Craig wanted to come for dinner. That was unusual. She rarely initiated anything that required effort on her end. I said yes. I made a simple dinner. Set the table the way Maggie taught me. Put coffee on. They arrived together. Craig shook my hand very firm, very practiced, accepted coffee, made small talk for exactly as long as it took him to decide the moment was right. Then he leaned forward and began talking about the house. Not Diane. Craig. He had clearly rehearsed this. There was a careful progression, the difficulty of maintaining a large property alone, the liability of another fall, the strong seller's market indicator right now, the options he actually used, that word, options, a real estate man's word available to someone in my position. He made it sound almost generous, as though selling my home was a favor he was offering to do for me. When he finished, I refilled everyone's coffee. Then I said, "The house is already in a trust." Craig's face did something complicated. "It was transferred about 6 weeks ago," I said. "After my death, it goes to a community land trust, affordable housing development in South Atlanta. Leonard handled everything." I said Leonard's name deliberately. Craig knew who Leonard was. He knew Leonard was not the kind of attorney you argue with over a dinner table. Diane had gone pale. Why didn't you tell us?" "I also updated the will," I said, "and the power of attorney. Leonard can walk you through the details if you have questions." The kitchen went very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down Orchard Hill Drive. The October trees were bare through the window. The gutters were clean. I had hired someone this time. One lesson was enough. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table, where she had done homework as a child and eaten more meals than either of us could count, and where Maggie had once helped her practice her wedding vows on a quiet morning before anyone else was awake. I looked at her, and I felt no satisfaction. None. What I felt was something closer to grief, the specific grief of finally seeing something clearly that you loved and having to account honestly for what you see. "I was in the hospital for 4 days," I said. "You came on day 4. I was going to come sooner, I know," I said. "And I know you love me in your way. But love is not a feeling you carry quietly inside yourself and cash in when something needs to be gained. Love is a choice you make when it costs you something, when there is nothing in it for you, when someone just needs another person in the room. I thought of Renata pulling up that chair without being asked. I thought of Frank and the crackers, and the 4 hours, and the bad knees, and the beat-up Camry. Some people in my life made that choice. I needed to arrange things to reflect that. Craig left first. Some excuse I didn't track. I didn't mind. I hadn't been talking to Craig. Diane stayed. She sat across from me and didn't speak for a long moment. And in that silence I could see her deciding something not about the house, not about the money, but about whether to keep performing or to finally just be honest. She chose honest. I didn't know it was that bad, she said quietly. She meant the marriage, the money, the quiet emergency her life had become. I felt like I couldn't tell you. I was trying to hold everything together, and I told myself you were fine. You're always fine. I fell off a ladder, I said. I know. I wasn't fine. I know, she said. And then softer. I'm sorry, Dad. There it was. The thing I hadn't let myself need until that moment. I sat with it for a few seconds before I answered. I'm not trying to remove you from my life, I said. You are my daughter. That is permanent. But I am 68 years old, and I may have another 20 years ahead of me if I'm careful and a little lucky. And I need those years to mean something. I need to know that the people around me are there because they want to be, not because of what they expect to receive. She cried a little. I gave her a napkin. We have always been a napkin family. Maggie thought tissues were for dramatics. What happens now? She said. Now you figure out your situation with Craig, I said. Get real help, a financial counselor, a therapist, whatever it takes. I'll help where I genuinely can. I'm not cutting you off, but I am not the solution to your problems. I should have said that plainly years ago instead of handing over money and calling it generosity. It wasn't generosity. It was avoidance, and it didn't help either of us. She nodded slowly. And when you can, I said, come for dinner. Not to ask for anything, not to discuss anything, just for dinner, just to be here. She stayed another hour. We talked about the grandkids. We talked about Maggie. Diane told me a story from a college trip to Mexico City that she had never told me, the full version of something that went completely sideways and was now, in retrospect, genuinely funny. We laughed, awkwardly at first, then more easily, the way people laugh when they've stopped pretending. When she left, she hugged me at the door. A real hug. Not the shoulder-to-shoulder press that had substituted for one in recent years. I'll come Thursday, she said. I'll make the chicken thing your mother used to do, I said. I want to be honest about where things stand now, because I think the honest version is more useful than the tidy one. Diane came that Thursday. She has come most Thursdays since. Things between us are different, not fixed, not the warm, easy closeness I might have wished for at some earlier point in a better version of things, but more real. There is less performance on both sides. She knows I see her clearly now. And something about being seen clearly, even when it is uncomfortable, seems to have made her try harder. Not for anything material, just to show up. Craig is a separate story. I don't know how that marriage ends. That is not mine to solve. I go to physical therapy twice a week. I walk with a cane that I hated at first and have made my peace with. It has a good solid weight, and I've started thinking of it as a tool rather than a concession, which is how I prefer to think about most things. Renata moved to the cardiac floor, but she sends me a note every few weeks, and I send a donation to the hospital foundation in her name. Frank and I play chess on Tuesday evenings, sometimes in person, sometimes over video call. The house on Orchard Hill Drive is mine. The gutters are clean. Maggie used to say the hardest part of being a parent was staying a whole person while you were doing it, not dissolving so completely into the role that when the children were grown, there was nothing of you left. I thought I understood what she meant when she said it. I didn't, not fully. Not until I was lying in wet October grass with a maple leaf on my face, thinking about the stove, realizing that the person I needed most in that moment was someone who would come, not because of what they stood to gain, but because they loved the man I actually was. I found a few of those people, fewer than I thought, more than I feared, and that, in the end, is enough to build something with. If you have ever lain in a room waiting for someone who did not come, you know the exact texture of what I am describing. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives as a phone screen and a vending machine cracker and a nurse who pulls up a chair without being asked. And then, very quietly, the rearrangement of everything. This story taught me that clarity is not the same thing as cruelty. Seeing someone honestly seeing what they have become, what they reach for when things are hard, does not mean you stop loving them. It means you stop organizing your life around a version of them that only exists in the comfortable story you've been telling yourself. The mistake I made for years was calling that avoidance generosity. It wasn't. It was fear with better posture. The one thing I would ask you to do today is simple. Think about who showed up the last time things were genuinely hard for you. Not dramatically hard. Not crisis hard. Just inconvenient hard. A Wednesday afternoon hard. That list, however short it is the real list. Those are the people worth building a life around. And the question I would ask you to sit with: is there someone in your life you have been waiting to show up for you? And if you are truly honest with yourself, haven't you known for a while now that they were not going to? Drop a number in the comments. Leave a 1 if you think I made the right call. A 2 if you think I went too far. A 3 if this story landed somewhere close to home and you're still sitting with it. I read every single one of those comments, and I genuinely want to know what this brought up for you. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. There is something I've always loved about knowing that people in different cities and different seasons and different chapters of their lives are listening to the same story and feeling something real inside it. And if this is your first time here, if this is the first story of mine you've found, I make these for the people who need to hear them. Not the clean, resolved, everything turns out fine versions. The real ones. The ones that leave you thinking. If that means something to you, the subscribe button is right there. It costs you nothing. And it means I get to keep doing this. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content.